Before performing any work on the arm, make sure the compensation pressure has been relieved or that the compensator being used for the arm has been isolated. Failure to do so can result in the sudden, unexpected loss of fluid. Also, be sure to lock out and tag out vehicle hydraulics and power. Replacement of the solenoid valve and filter can be performed on a fully assembled manipulator. Use a 3/16 socket to remove all 16 hex head bolts that secure the upper arm top cover plate. Each bolt has an O-ring underneath the head, so be sure to retain each O-ring. Removing the plate will expose the solenoid valve and filter assembly. Filter replacement can be accomplished without removing the solenoid valve. To remove the filter, use a 3/8 hex drive to loosen and unthread the hollow hex plug that holds the filter in place. With the plug removed, you can see the filter inside the housing. Then use a 1/2-inch socket to loosen and unthread the filter. Once the filter is unthreaded, use a pair of needle nose pliers to grab the filter and lift it out of its housing. To replace the filter, place a new replacement filter into the housing and use a 1/2-inch socket to tighten it snugly. Then thread the hollow hex plug over it and tighten it snugly using a 3/8 hex drive. Test the arm and look for internal leaks before replacing any cover plates. This completes the replacement of the filter. To remove the solenoid valve, first find the electrical connector for the solenoid valve, marked ISO for isolation valve, and disconnect it. Next, use a 3/16 Allen wrench to loosen and remove the 3 socket head cap screws that secure the solenoid valve assembly into the upper arm. With those removed, the entire assembly can be lifted out of the arm and moved to a workbench. To replace the solenoid valve, use a 5/32 Allen wrench to loosen and remove the 4 socket head cap screws that thread through the top of the valve. With the screws removed, the valve can be lifted off of the filter housing. Be sure to collect the O-rings on the bottom of the valve. To install a replacement valve, first clean, lubricate, and install the O-rings on the bottom of the valve. Then line up the alignment pin on the valve with the corresponding hole in the filter housing. Place the solenoid valve and the filter housing together and thread the 4 socket head cap screws through the assembly. Use a 5/32 Allen wrench to tighten the bolts, then torque them to 11 foot-pounds or 14.9 Newton meters. In the upper arm, clean, lubricate, and reinstall the O-rings on the manifold. Then reinstall the assembly into the upper arm by sliding it over the filter until it is seated fully against the manifold. Make sure the threads and holes are oil-free. Then apply Loctite 271 or equivalent thread locker to the threads of the 3 socket head cap screws that secure the solenoid valve assembly to the upper arm. Tighten them using a 3/16 Allen wrench and torque them to 11 foot-pounds or 14.9 Newton meters. Reconnect the electrical connector for the solenoid valve inside the arm. Test the arm to look for internal leaks, and then reattach the upper arm top cover plate. Inspect, lubricate, and install the O-ring that sits inside the opening of the upper arm housing, as well as the O-rings under the heads of the 16 hex head bolts that secure the plate. Apply AquaShield waterproof grease on each of the hex head bolts. Then thread each of the bolts through the cover plate and into the upper arm. Use a 3/16 socket to tighten the bolts. Once the bolts are tightened, torque them all to 8 foot-pounds. This completes the replacement of the solenoid valve and filter.